Hey everyone, tonight we're drifting back to a quieter, slightly gloomy corner of history, where the chandeliers are dusty, the corridors echo endlessly, and the people in charge wear crowns that are, frankly, a little too heavy for their heads. Settle in. Dim the lights. Perhaps grab a warm drink. Or don't. It's optional, because we're going to wander through a world of polished floors, velvet gowns, and the sort of royal dysfunction that makes your family dinners seem almost tolerable. It's soothing, really, to think about people so high up the social ladder who were, in so many ways, utterly doomed by genetics, etiquette, and the occasional bout of extremely bad judgment. Tonight, we're focusing on the European royals. The ones who had everything, and somehow managed to make it all uncomfortable. Let's start gently, with the concept of royal marriages. You see, these were rarely about love. Naturally, they were about alliances, property, and the faint hope that your grandchildren wouldn't all die of tuberculosis. Marriages were often arranged before anyone involved could even speak in full sentences. Imagine being promised to a stranger at the age of 6. Not ideal. Take, for example, Charles VI of France. He was nicknamed Charles the Well-Beloved, which, in retrospect, is amusing if you ignore the fact that he spent much of his adult life believing he was made of glass. Yes, glass. Not metaphorically, but quite literally convinced that his bones would shatter if touched. A delicate fellow. He married Isabeau of Bavaria, who, by all accounts, was polite and charming, and deeply aware that she had to produce heirs or risk France descending into chaotic war. She produced heirs, naturally, and Charles occasionally tried to stab imaginary enemies in the middle of the night. It's hard to know whether the kingdom suffered more from his paranoia or from the resulting childbearing frenzy that accompanied royal duty. We can drift over to another dynasty, where things got even more awkward. The Habsburgs. Oh, the Habsburgs. Their family motto might as well have been, keep it in the family, and hope for the best. Marriages between cousins were so frequent that one begins to wonder if anyone could remember who was related to whom without consulting a family tree that resembled a particularly tangled set of Christmas lights. Charles II of Spain, for example, was the unfortunate product of generations of carefully calculated cousin marriages. He was sickly, physically fragile, and intellectually limited. People whispered that he could hardly chew his own food without assistance. And yet, he was king. A tragic figure, yes, but also strangely comforting if you enjoy the idea that even absolute power cannot overcome a relentless string of poor genetic choices. Now, let's drift gently over to England, where the Tudors were busy producing exactly the kind of drama that would make any modern soap opera look like a mild suggestion. Henry VIII, of course, is infamous for his 6 marriages. But consider young Edward VI, the sickly boy king, whose upbringing was an endless parade of tutors, physicians, and wet nurses. He was expected to absorb knowledge, master languages, and maintain a composure suitable for ruling a kingdom, all while teetering on the brink of serious illness. Childhood, in this context, was less about play and more about survival and memorization. And yet, childhoods weren't always tragic in the obvious way. Sometimes, they were absurd. Queen Victoria's children were raised with strict routines that would make a modern office worker weep quietly into their tea. Lessons, etiquette drills, and interminable prayers filled every hour, leaving little room for spontaneous play. By adulthood, they were competent, yes, but also thoroughly convinced that the right answer to any emotional problem was a stiff upper lip, or at least an awkwardly worded letter. Even outside of England, the pattern repeats. In France, Louis XIV, the Sun King, was indulged by a court that oscillated between awe and exhaustion. He became absolute, he became powerful, he became, in some ways, a caricature of himself. And yet, as a child, he endured long hours of formal education, rigid routines, and a carefully monitored diet that was intended to shape him into a perfect king. Perfection, as it turns out, often comes with a side of melancholy and a lifelong sense of being endlessly observed. So, as we settle further into the soft glow of our evening thoughts, it becomes clear that royal life was a curious combination of excess and deprivation. The elites had all the trappings of comfort, but little of the freedom or joy that we take for granted. They were expected to be flawless, intelligent, beautiful, and obedient simultaneously, a recipe for endless anxiety. Let's drift over to the next royal fiasco. Now, let's ease into a quieter, slightly unsettling topic: the curious ways in which royals, in their infinite wisdom, decided to keep their bloodlines tidy. And by tidy, I mean closely related, intermarried, and sometimes catastrophically unfortunate. You see, European dynasties had a habit of marrying cousins, aunts, uncles, and occasionally people who were, frankly, only vaguely recognizable as family. Their reasoning was simple: alliances, land, and the faint hope that beauty and brains might somehow persist across generations. Reality, as we shall see, was far less tidy. Take the Habsburg jaw, a favorite subject of historians and illustrators alike. Charles II of Spain, the last Habsburg king of his line, had what is politely called a pronounced mandibular prognathism. In layman's terms, a jaw that looked complicated. It was the result of generations of intermarriage, designed to keep the throne within the family. Unfortunately, it also produced a host of physical and cognitive challenges. He was weak, frail, and struggled with basic tasks like chewing food properly. One imagines the court physicians sighing quietly, adjusting his pillows, and muttering that perhaps they should have included a little genetic variety somewhere along the way. Over in France, Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were distant cousins, which was fairly standard for royalty, but still worth noting. Their marriage, though politically convenient, was socially awkward. Louis was gentle, shy, and not especially assertive, a fact that would become painfully relevant when he inherited a kingdom in crisis. Marie, young, exuberant, and slightly overwhelmed, was expected to manage court intrigues while producing heirs. The resulting children were, to be kind, unusually delicate. Louis Charles, the young Dauphin, suffered various illnesses throughout his short life. And while this isn't exactly tragic if you're looking for a bedtime story, it does illustrate the quiet hazards of dynastic planning. Genes have moods, and they are often unpredictable. Meanwhile, the Russian Romanovs were quietly perfecting a similarly grim hobby. Tsarevich Alexei, the son of Nicholas II, inherited hemophilia, a disease that makes even minor injuries potentially lethal. This was not a surprise to the court, because his mother, Alexandra, was a granddaughter of Queen Victoria, who famously passed the condition through her descendants. One can imagine Alexandra pacing the imperial palace at night, worrying over bandages, doctors, and the faint possibility that a simple bump could end her son's life. It's a sobering example of how even royal privilege cannot prevent the relentless arithmetic of inheritance. Drifting south, the Bourbons of Spain were equally meticulous about maintaining their family tree, with similarly disastrous results. Marriages between first cousins were common, producing children with frailties ranging from dental problems to developmental delays. One imagines tutors and court physicians sighing quietly at the breakfast table, arranging the soft-boiled eggs in a precise pattern, hoping, perhaps vainly, that nutrition might compensate for generations of calculated inbreeding. And yet, for every tragedy, there was a hint of absurdity. The Habsburgs, in particular, offer a catalog of gently ridiculous outcomes. A prominent example is Ferdinand of Austria, whose jaw was so pronounced that portraits make him look as though he is perpetually mid-chew. And yet, Ferdinand ruled competently, negotiated treaties, and somehow managed to appear regal in paintings, despite his mildly alarming facial structure. It's comforting, in a sleepy sort of way, to know that appearance and capability are not perfectly correlated, even in royal families. Over in England, genetic caution was less obsessive but still present. Queen Victoria, ever diligent, married her cousins carefully, producing heirs who spread hemophilia across Europe. One imagines Victoria in her quiet rooms, knitting, writing letters, and pondering the curious ripple effects of one recessive gene. Her children married into Russia, Germany, and Spain, unknowingly creating a continent-wide experiment in fragile royal bloodlines. It's almost endearing how she tried so hard to produce healthy, capable heirs while genetics quietly ignored her wishes. And speaking of genetics quietly ignoring wishes, let's consider the Medici once more. Despite immense wealth, intellect, and influence, their attempts to control family lines often resulted in weak or short-lived children. Cosimo I, for instance, produced offspring who were alternately brilliant and infirm, leaving future historians to speculate whether genetics, politics, or mere chance was the decisive factor. One imagines palace corridors echoing with soft footsteps, tiny voices reading aloud, and the faint sense that, no matter how much one plans, life has a subtle way of reshuffling priorities. And finally, we can drift gently toward the less obvious consequences of these marriages. Beyond frailty and physical quirks, there were also personality oddities, nervousness, obsessive habits, and social awkwardness. These were not dramatic in the sense of sword fights or rebellions, but they were certainly noticeable in quiet moments, a king tapping his fingers endlessly, a princess refusing to eat certain foods, a child endlessly repeating lessons. Court observers, chroniclers, and tutors recorded these things with a mix of concern and weary amusement. And one cannot help but feel a quiet sympathy for these delicate figures, so constrained by blood, expectation, and palace walls. So, as we let our minds drift over the Habsburg jaw, hemophiliac princes, and fragile Medici heirs, it becomes clear that royal life, despite its wealth and splendor, was quietly treacherous. Not with swords, not with battles, but with genes, routines, and the relentless expectations of perfection. They were children and adults, simultaneously pampered and constrained, brilliant and delicate. And with that, let's ease into the next gentle exploration, the petty, often absurd rivalries, jealousies, and daily irritations of the most dysfunctional kings and queens. They are slightly less tragic than fragile heirs, and perhaps a bit more amusing, perfect for letting the mind float into that drowsy, reflective state we're aiming for tonight. Now, let's settle into a quieter, slightly ridiculous corner of history, where power is absolute, manners are complex, and pride occasionally outweighs common sense. This is the realm of petty, eccentric, and sometimes downright dysfunctional monarchs. They had the luxury of crowns and the responsibility of ruling nations, yet, in their private moments, they could be remarkably ordinary in all the wrong ways. Take Louis XIV of France, the Sun King. Magnificent, ambitious, and obsessed with control, he ruled a kingdom where etiquette reigned as absolutely as he did. Yet, behind the palace doors of Versailles, he indulged in small, quietly absurd obsessions. Shoes, for instance. He reportedly owned hundreds of pairs and would sometimes decide the color of his footwear dictated the course of courtly conversation. One can picture him pacing slowly, choosing a scarlet slipper, and inadvertently setting the tone for an entire week of political intrigue. It is comforting, in a way, that even the most powerful king can be preoccupied with something as mundane as matching shoes. Drifting gently over to England, we find Charles II, known to his contemporaries as the Merry Monarch. He had a remarkable gift for enjoying life and for creating confusion. Affairs, illegitimate children, and a general disregard for marital propriety defined much of his reign. Yet, he was clever, charming, and oddly competent. Court gossip swirled like fog over the Thames, but Charles seemed largely indifferent. One imagines him reclining in a velvet chair, a faint smile on his lips, while courtiers whispered about his latest romantic escapade. Charming, yes. Responsible? Not so much. And then there's Queen Christina of Sweden, whom we met briefly as a child. As an adult, she rejected marriage entirely and preferred the company of philosophers, artists, and occasional eccentricities. Her refusal to marry was both a personal statement and a political headache. One imagines the royal advisors sighing quietly as she hosted salons in palace halls, debating philosophy while the machinery of governance waited patiently for her attention. Her pettiness was subtle but pervasive. She could issue an edict one day, then host a masquerade the next, leaving the court oscillating between admiration and mild despair. Over in Russia, Peter the Great had a more explosive, though equally petty, streak. He modernized a nation, but he also delighted in humiliating his nobles. Inspections, bizarre punishments, and elaborate practical jokes were part of his daily routine. Yet, one can almost forgive him when imagining him pacing quietly in his study, quietly fuming about the incompetence of a courtier or the ill-fitting coat of a visiting diplomat. Petty, yes. But in a methodical, sleepily terrifying way. Meanwhile, England's George IV was a king whose obsessions were almost entirely culinary and sartorial. Lavish clothing, extravagant banquets, and personal comforts defined his reign as much as legislation or diplomacy. He was known to be vain, indulgent, and socially awkward, yet endlessly endearing in his stubborn pursuit of pleasure. One imagines him lingering over an elaborate dessert, calculating how best to arrange his powdered wig, while the kingdom awaited his decisions on matters of state. Comforting, really, that even kings can be human in such specific ways. Drifting back to France, we encounter Marie Antoinette, a queen whose life is often remembered for excess and tragedy. She was a figure of immense wealth and taste, but also of peculiar personal habits. She adored small, intimate theatricals in her private gardens and cultivated miniature villages for amusement. While her country teetered on the edge of revolution, she quietly enjoyed the company of dolls, playhouses, and intricately arranged pastries. There is something gently absurd about royalty, powerful, terrifying, yet entirely capable of delighting in tiny, private pleasures. And then there are the lesser-known monarchs, whose petty obsessions make them perfect companions for drowsy reflection. Edward VI, for instance, meticulously measured every detail of his daily routine, leaving little room for spontaneity. Louis XV obsessed over minor protocol violations at Versailles, sending courtiers into quiet panic over missing gloves or misplaced fans. These small irritations, magnified by the palace setting, created worlds of endless minor drama, perfectly suitable for imagining while easing into sleep. Even in the Holy Roman Empire, emperors like Ferdinand II displayed subtle eccentricities. Pious, strict, and endlessly preoccupied with ceremonial correctness, he could be simultaneously brilliant in statecraft and tiresomely particular in personal matters. One imagines him sighing over the arrangement of silverware, muttering about improper bowing, all while Europe's political machinery ground slowly onward. And, of course, petty dysfunction often intersected with family life. Children were sometimes pawns, sometimes mirrors, and sometimes the unwitting participants in absurd disputes. Queens fought over precedence at court, princes competed for attention, and minor disagreements occasionally escalated into formal edicts. It's oddly comforting to realize that, despite their crowns, these humans experience the same small frustrations, jealousies, and domestic irritations that we do, only with more velvet and gold. So, as we allow these lightly absurd tales of royal pettiness to drift through our minds, the pattern becomes clear: power does not eliminate human quirks. It magnifies them, sometimes in hilarious, sometimes in poignant ways. The most dysfunctional kings and queens are, in retrospect, perfectly suited to lull our thoughts toward quiet amusement. Their obsessions are peculiar, their habits particular, and their lives, strangely relatable when observed from a safe distance of centuries. And with that, we can begin to drift toward Part 4, sickly, spoiled, and sad, medieval royal childhoods, where the combination of fragility, expectation, and privilege produces some of the most quietly fascinating stories of all. Now, let's wander quietly back a few centuries, into the dimly lit halls of medieval castles, where children were born into privilege, and yet lived lives that were, in many ways, quietly tragic. These little royals had everything: wealth, tutors, attendants, but almost none of the things we associate with a normal childhood. Play was a carefully measured activity. Meals were formal affairs. Education was relentless, and affection, when given, was often calculated. Take Henry VI of England. He was king as a baby, though naturally, he could do very little with the title. His early years were a mix of tutors, physicians, and attendants who monitored his every sneeze. He was sickly, delicate, and prone to fainting spells. One imagines tiny Henry, wrapped in layers of silk and wool, staring out of a high window at the gardens below, wondering vaguely why he couldn't just toddle around like other children. And yet, this enforced stillness shaped him into a monarch of gentle temperament, often painfully gentle, who would later struggle to command respect in turbulent times. Across the Channel, French royal children fared similarly. Louis IX, later St. Louis, was frail as a boy. His life was filled with lessons in piety, politics, and swordsmanship, often conducted while he remained confined to a carefully monitored routine. Illnesses were frequent, and the slightest mishap might cause extended periods of bed rest. And yet, within these rigid boundaries, the seeds of leadership, devotion, and strategic thinking were sown, albeit alongside a faint, persistent melancholy. Even when not physically ill, children could be overwhelmed by the sheer weight of expectation. Consider Edward III's offspring. From infancy, they were taught that every action, every glance, every word, might have consequences for kingdoms, alliances, and dynasties. Childhood, in such circumstances, was a continuous performance. One imagines the corridors of palaces echoing with the soft, nervous laughter of young royals attempting to appear cheerful while memorizing genealogies or practicing elaborate bows. Education itself was an oddly oppressive affair. Tutors emphasized Latin, arithmetic, history, and theology with such rigor that little time remained for games, naps, or idle curiosity. Even leisure activities were controlled. Jousting lessons, hunting expeditions, and music practice all followed strict schedules. One could almost hear the faint ticking of an invisible clock, marking the passage of each carefully monitored moment. And then there was the diet. Food in medieval courts was designed to impress, not nourish. Meals were elaborate, often rich, sometimes inappropriate for fragile children. Porridges, meats, and spiced delicacies were carefully portioned, yet accidents, spilled broth, poorly cooked meat, could trigger medical alarm. Physicians and attendants hovered endlessly, making notes, adjusting pillows, and muttering about the delicate constitution of young princes and princesses. It was a world where indulgence and fragility existed side by side, a delicate balance that often seemed absurd from a modern perspective. Let's drift toward the Habsburg children once more. They were expected to master multiple languages, understand courtly protocol, and learn the arts of diplomacy before even reaching adolescence. Playtime was minimal, affection measured, and mistakes could carry consequences far beyond the nursery. And yet, there were small comforts, favored toys, brief excursions into gardens, or the quiet solace of a story told by a nurse. Life was strict, but not entirely joyless, if joy could be defined as a fleeting, carefully permitted interruption in the relentless pursuit of perfection. Scotland offers similar tales. James I's childhood was marked by captivity, negotiation, and careful grooming for kingship. He spent years under strict supervision, yet developed a love of poetry and learning that persisted into adulthood. Even in harsh circumstances, small intellectual pleasures were allowed, albeit quietly, in corners of the palace where no one could disturb the delicate routine. And, naturally, illness loomed over every young royal. In a world without modern medicine, fevers, rashes, and coughs were both frightening and mundane. Wet nurses, physicians, and attendants formed a constant background hum of quiet concern. One imagines the soft rustling of linens, whispered prayers, and the faint clatter of cups and spoons, all underscoring the fragile, precarious nature of childhood in the palaces of Europe. Yet, even amidst fragility, these children were often astonishingly resilient. They learned languages, memorized histories, practiced combat, and navigated court intrigue, all before they were 10. The contrast is quietly fascinating: small bodies, delicate minds, yet burdened with responsibilities far beyond their years. Childhood, for these royals, was less about freedom and more about preparation for a lifetime of expectation and scrutiny. As we drift further, it becomes clear that medieval royal childhoods were both privileged and constrained, indulgent and punishing, joyous in small measures and overwhelmingly serious. They lived in a world of velvet and stone, of soft voices and strict rules, of fragile health and constant supervision. It is both tragic and oddly comforting. These children, heirs to kingdoms, were entirely human in their vulnerability, even as history elevated them into mythic figures. So, as we let our thoughts float over the faintly echoing halls, tiny feet padding on cold stone floors, and soft candlelight illuminating carefully polished armor, we prepare to drift toward our final reflections. Soon, we will consider the gentle, cumulative weight of all these dynastic quirks, illnesses, and obsessions, the quiet, strangely soothing pattern that emerges when we view history not as battles and conquests, but as lives lived in subtle, human detail. Hey everyone, tonight we're drifting back to a quieter, somewhat gloomy corner of European history, where the corridors are long, the chandeliers sway ever so slightly, and the people in charge wear crowns that are a bit too heavy for their heads. Settle in. Perhaps dim the lights. Maybe wrap yourself in a blanket or pour yourself a small cup of something warm. Or don't. The point is comfort, and you can define it however you like. We're going to wander through the lives of royals. Not the shining heroes you read about in textbooks, but the ones who were fragile, eccentric, and occasionally quite pitiful. They had every advantage imaginable: palaces, tutors, servants, and titles that inspired awe, but also the kind of burdens that made ordinary life feel strangely simple. They were subject to expectations so immense that even a minor sneeze could ripple through the court like a scandalous rumor. Let's start with royal marriages. These were rarely about love. Naturally, they were about alliances, land, and keeping dynasties intact. Children were betrothed before they could walk properly, and often, by the time they were of age, they had long forgotten the faces of their prospective spouses. Consider Charles VI of France. He was nicknamed the Well-Beloved, which is amusing if you ignore the fact that he spent much of his adult life convinced he was made of glass. Not metaphorically. Glass. Entirely fragile. He married Isabeau of Bavaria, who, by all accounts, was polite, charming, and aware of her duty to produce heirs. And she did, while Charles occasionally tried to stab invisible enemies in the middle of the night. The kingdom, naturally, suffered from a mixture of paranoia, politics, and ill-timed fainting spells. Then there are the Habsburgs, whose family motto might as well have been, "Keep it in the family, and hope for the best." Generations of intermarriage produced Charles II of Spain, who was physically frail, intellectually limited, and had such extreme features that portrait artists seemed compelled to whisper when painting him. He could barely chew his own food without assistance. He was, quite literally, a king in a fragile frame. A tragic figure, yes, but oddly comforting if you like imagining that even absolute power cannot override the laws of heredity. Meanwhile, the Tudors of England were busy producing drama of a different, slightly more performative kind. Henry VIII's 6 marriages are famous, but consider young Edward VI. A sickly child, he was raised under an endless parade of tutors, wet nurses, and physicians. He had to master languages, theology, and governance, all while teetering precariously on the edge of illness. Childhood, in his case, was less about play and more about survival and memorization. Even when childhood was less perilous, it was often strictly regimented. Queen Victoria's children were raised under schedules so precise that a modern office worker would weep quietly into their tea. Lessons, prayers, and etiquette drills left almost no room for spontaneous play. By adulthood, these children were competent, but also so rigidly trained that the idea of improvisation was mildly terrifying. France, too, offers examples. Louis XIV, the Sun King, was indulged yet carefully monitored. His childhood was a delicate balance of education, courtly observation, and endless ceremonial obligations. He would grow up to rule absolutely, yet the seeds of his lifelong obsessions, etiquette, spectacle, control, were quietly sown during those long, structured years. And so, as we settle further into the quiet of our evening, it becomes clear that royal life was a mixture of excess and deprivation. They had wealth, power, and comfort, yet were often fragile, anxious, and entirely human. One cannot help but feel a little sympathy for them, even while smirking at the strange consequences of being born to perfectionist dynasties. Let's drift over to the next royal fiasco. Cosimo I de' Medici of Italy, for instance, was a shrewd, calculating ruler who nevertheless produced children who were alternately brilliant and frail. One wonders if his success at governance came from careful planning, or sheer luck that some of his offspring survived infancy. Meanwhile, Peter the Great of Russia, as a boy, spent hours drilling miniature armies in palace courtyards while enduring Tudors' relentless lectures. Perhaps this was preparation for the enormous task of dragging Russia, often kicking and screaming, into a modern age. Even the seemingly idyllic Habsburgs were quietly tragic. Philip II of Spain was intelligent and devout, yet his multiple marriages produced children who were frequently weak or sickly. Dynastic planning was precise, meticulous, and ultimately powerless against the quiet arithmetic of genetics. And so, across France, England, Russia, Italy, and Spain, a pattern emerges: children were educated, monitored, and, in many ways, confined, while fragile health and relentless expectation shaped their lives. Even tiny details, the way pillows were arranged, meals prepared, lessons scheduled, had consequences for the future of kingdoms. And yet, amidst all the formality, there were small pleasures: gardens to wander, stories whispered by nurses, occasional music, or private laughter in a quiet corner of the palace. As our minds drift over these lives, we begin to see the rhythm of royal history in a gentle, almost hypnotic way. A fragile prince fainting in a velvet chair. A young queen counting her tiny footsteps through the corridors. Tutors adjusting a cushion under a delicate child. It is both distant and comforting, a lullaby of history performed in slow, measured tones. And so, let us remain here for a moment, imagining the soft candlelight, the echoing halls, the quiet, oddly human fragility of those born to immense privilege. Let us breathe with them, feel the weight of expectation, and yet drift gently towards sleep, carried by the stories of these oddly relatable monarchs. Now, let's float into a quieter, slightly unsettling corner of history, the world of European royal marriages. They were rarely about love, naturally, and almost always about alliances, land, and keeping dynasties pure. By pure, of course, they meant closely related, cousins, nieces, uncles. Genetics, in this case, became a subtle antagonist. And, as history often shows, nature has a way of quietly mocking even the best-laid dynastic plans. Take the Habsburgs. Oh, the Habsburgs. Their family motto might as well have been, keep it in the family and hope for the best. Generations of cousin marriages produced Charles II of Spain, the last Habsburg king of his line. Charles was frail, physically deformed, and intellectually limited. His jaw was so pronounced that historians still refer to it as the Habsburg jaw, a visible testament to centuries of careful, or careless, intermarriage. He could barely chew food, struggled to speak clearly, and required assistance with basic tasks. And yet, he was king. A gentle reminder that titles cannot override genetics. Meanwhile, in England, Queen Victoria, ever diligent, married her cousins and produced a network of heirs that spread hemophilia across Europe. Her children married into Russian, German, and Spanish royal houses, quietly carrying the gene that would produce fragile, sickly princes and princesses. Tsarevich Alexei of Russia, for example, inherited the disease, making every minor cut potentially life-threatening. One imagines Alexandra, his mother, pacing the palace halls at night, whispering prayers while silently cursing the stubborn persistence of heredity. Back in Spain, the Bourbons were similarly meticulous in preserving their lineage. First cousin marriages were common. Children often suffered from fragile health, dental deformities, or delayed development. Tutors, wet nurses, and physicians hovered constantly, trying to manage the delicate balance between nurture and genetic inevitability. One imagines small royal dining rooms filled with cautious attendants, whispered instructions, and the faint smell of overcooked porridge. And yet, amidst these tragedies, there is a subtle absurdity. Ferdinand of Austria had the infamous jawline but ruled competently. Charles II's deformities were extreme, yet portraits depict him with dignity, if slightly awkward dignity. Genetics, it seems, is both cruel and strangely accommodating. Even when marriages were not immediately disastrous, the long-term consequences could be quietly dramatic. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, distant cousins, produced children who were delicate and often ill. Louis Charles, the young Dauphin, suffered various maladies, leaving his parents in perpetual quiet anxiety. It's remarkable, in a softly tragic way, that even in palaces filled with wealth, power, and medical attention, the simple arithmetic of genetics could not be defeated. Meanwhile, the Medici of Italy, despite immense wealth and intellect, experienced a similar pattern. Cosimo I's children were a mix of brilliance, illness, and occasional misfortune. Some survived to adulthood, others did not. It's easy to imagine corridors echoing with soft footsteps and distant laughter, while physicians quietly calculated which child might survive the next decade. Over in France, the Bourbons faced subtler consequences. Physical quirks, frailty, and predispositions to illness were passed along with crowns and estates. Yet, oddly, many of these children grew into competent rulers, or at least rulers who could maintain appearances. In their private chambers, however, vulnerability persisted. Courtiers observed them faintly, whispering about delicate hands, weak constitutions, or awkward movements. It's not all tragedy, though. There is a gently comforting rhythm to these stories. The royals were human, after all, beautifully flawed, fragile, sometimes sickly, yet capable of surviving against the odds. Their lives remind us that even power and privilege cannot always overcome the quiet inevitabilities of biology. The delicate balance between ambition, expectation, and heredity created generations of individuals who were endlessly fascinating, subtly tragic, and, in retrospect, strangely soothing to contemplate. And so, as we drift along, picturing pale children in velvet gowns, tutors counting syllables, and physicians scribbling notes in candlelight, we can see the curious pattern that emerges across Europe. Royal marriages often prioritized strategy over health. Generations of careful planning could not prevent frailty. And yet, amid the fragility, there is endurance. These dynasties, despite everything, survived centuries. The human element, the vulnerability, the quirks, the quiet suffering, makes their stories oddly comforting, particularly when we observe them from the calm distance of centuries. Let's drift over to the next royal conundrum, the petty, eccentric, and sometimes absurd behaviors of kings and queens, whose personal quirks were as fascinating as their titles were intimidating. Because of course, absolute power does not eliminate human pettiness. It magnifies it, often in the most drowsy and amusing ways. Now, let's settle into a quiet, peculiar corner of history, where absolute power meets remarkably ordinary human flaws. These are the monarchs whose personal quirks, obsessions, and pettiness defined much of their reigns. They wore crowns, yes, but often their behavior could be oddly relatable or quietly amusing, from the distant perspective of centuries. Take Louis XIV of France, the Sun King. Magnificent, ambitious, almost painfully attentive to appearances, he ruled with absolute authority. Yet, behind the gilded doors of Versailles, he had small, quietly absurd obsessions. Shoes, for example. He owned hundreds of pairs, and their color could dictate the subtle moods and interactions of the entire court. Imagine him pacing slowly, choosing scarlet over gold, while courtiers whispered and adjusted their bows accordingly. Even kings, it seems, are sometimes preoccupied with surprisingly mundane things. Over in England, Charles II, the merry monarch, provides a gentler, albeit chaotic, example. He had affairs, illegitimate children, and a general disregard for marital propriety. Yet he was charming, clever, and largely indifferent to gossip, except when it directly interfered with his comfort. One imagines him reclining in a velvet chair, sipping wine, while courtiers murmured in hushed tones about his latest romantic misadventure. Power, for Charles, coexisted with an almost lazy indulgence in personal pleasure. Meanwhile, Queen Christina of Sweden rejected marriage entirely, preferring philosophy, art, and intellectual pursuits. Her refusal to marry was both personal and political, leaving advisors quietly exasperated. She hosted salons, debated philosophers, and occasionally disrupted court routines in subtle, perfectly executed ways. Petty? Perhaps, but elegant, deliberate, and entirely human in its execution. Russia's Peter the Great offers a different flavor. A reformer, a modernizer, and a practical joker. He delighted in humiliating his nobles, inventing bizarre inspections and punishments for minor mistakes. Yet, one can picture him quietly fuming in his study over an ill-fitting coat, while plotting the modernization of an entire empire. Petty, yes, but methodical and strangely compelling. George IV of England, in contrast, was preoccupied with fashion, food, and comfort. Lavish clothing, elaborate banquets, and personal indulgence defined much of his reign. He could be vain, indulgent, socially awkward, yet endlessly stubborn about his pleasures. One imagines him lingering over desserts, calculating the precise angle of his powdered wig, while the kingdom waited for decisions on more serious matters. Marie Antoinette in France, meanwhile, was adored and criticized in equal measure. She delighted in tiny theatrical performances, miniature villages, and intricately decorated pastries. While her country teetered toward revolution, she quietly pursued private joys in the gardens of Versailles, arranging her life as if it were a delicate, miniature stage. Absurd? Perhaps. Comforting? Definitely, in the quiet rhythm of ritual and routine. Even lesser-known monarchs offered gentle amusement. Edward VI of England measured every detail of his life with extreme care, leaving little room for spontaneity. Louis XV obsessed over minor protocol violations at Versailles, creating tiny ripples of panic among courtiers. Ferdinand II of the Holy Roman Empire insisted on exact ceremonial precision, yet somehow managed to maintain his dignity. Petty rivalries often intersected with family life. Children were pawns, mirrors, or unsuspecting participants in absurd disputes. Queens debated precedents, princes sought attention, and small disagreements occasionally escalated into formal edicts. From our distant, calm vantage, these minor dramas are oddly comforting, human quirks magnified, yet contained in the soft, echoing halls of palaces. As we drift over these quietly absurd lives, a pattern emerges: absolute power does not erase human frailty. It amplifies it. Obsessions, pettiness, and eccentricities become visible, forming a gentle rhythm to the otherwise rigid order of monarchy. These monarchs, despite their crowns, are human in their flaws, which makes them excellent companions for bedtime reflection. And so, with our thoughts on Louis XIV, Charles II, Queen Christina, Peter the Great, George IV, and Marie Antoinette lingering softly, we prepare to drift toward the final part of tonight's journey: sickly, spoiled, and sad, medieval royal childhoods, where fragility, expectation, and privilege collide in the most quietly fascinating ways. Now, let's wander quietly back to the medieval world, where castle walls are cold stone, hallways echo faintly, and royal children live lives that are both privileged and quietly tragic. These little princes and princesses had almost everything they could desire: tutors, palaces, servants, but almost none of the freedom or simplicity that ordinary childhoods enjoy. Play was scheduled, meals were formal, and affection, when offered, was carefully measured. Take Henry VI of England. He was king as a baby, which, naturally, meant very little to him personally. But it did mean endless supervision. Tutors, wet nurses, physicians, every sneeze, every nap, every minor hiccup in digestion was carefully monitored. He was frail, prone to fainting, and had to navigate a world where even a small illness could ripple through the court. One can imagine little Henry, swaddled in layers of silk and wool, staring out the window at the gardens, longing for freedom he could barely imagine. Across the Channel, French royal children experienced similar constraints. Louis IX, later St. Louis, was delicate and frequently ill. His days were filled with lessons in piety, politics, and combat, often while lying in a bed designed more for ceremony than comfort. Even amidst illness, he was expected to grow into a model of royal virtue. Play existed, yes, but always as a carefully supervised and morally instructive activity. Education itself was rigorous and unrelenting. Young royals were expected to master Latin, arithmetic, history, music, and theology, all before reaching adolescence. Tutors measured progress with precision, leaving little room for improvisation or idle curiosity. Leisure was regimented, if allowed at all. Jousting lessons, hunting practice, and music training all followed strict schedules. One could almost hear an invisible clock ticking with every carefully monitored moment. Diet was another source of quiet tension. Meals in royal households were designed to impress, not necessarily to nourish. Delicate children might be served rich, spiced dishes far beyond their needs, creating both delight and, often, discomfort. Physicians hovered constantly, adjusting pillows, monitoring digestion, and offering advice that ranged from sensible to slightly absurd. It's comforting, in a strange way, to know that even kings and queens contended with mild gastrointestinal drama. The Habsburg children were a prime example of these pressures. Cosimo I de' Medici's offspring were alternately brilliant and frail, surviving infancy in a delicate balance of care, luck, and strict supervision. One can imagine the quiet corridors of palaces, footsteps echoing softly as nurses and attendants navigated a web of expectations, whispers, and delicate routines. Scotland offers another illustration. James I's early years were marked by captivity, strict tutelage, and constant oversight. Yet even under these conditions, he developed a love for poetry and learning. Quiet intellectual pleasures, permitted in corners of the castle, provided small but meaningful respite from the constant pressure to perform. And of course, illness was ever present. In a world without modern medicine, fevers, rashes, and minor injuries were serious concerns. Wet nurses, physicians, and attendants formed a continuous background hum of gentle vigilance. One imagines the rustle of linens, the whisper of prayers, and the soft clatter of cups and spoons, all underscoring the fragile, precarious nature of these children's lives. Despite fragility and strictness, these young royals often displayed remarkable resilience. They memorized languages, histories, religious texts, and courtly protocols while still learning to walk or sit at a table. The contrast is quietly fascinating: small bodies, delicate health, yet the expectation to perform with extraordinary competence. Childhood was preparation, performance, and survival, all rolled into one, and rarely a moment of genuine play or ease. As our thoughts drift over these faintly echoing halls, the fragile footsteps of young princes and princesses, the careful arrangement of pillows and books, it's easy to see the rhythm of medieval royal childhoods. Lives of immense privilege, yes, but also of meticulous control, constant observation, and quiet anxiety. Small joys were permitted, occasional music, a short garden walk, whispered stories, but always within the strict parameters of what was deemed suitable for royalty. And yet, there is a strange, gentle comfort in these reflections. These children, destined for thrones, were entirely human in their fragility, their fears, and their small pleasures. Candlelight flickers on polished stone, soft shadows stretch along tapestries, and tiny footsteps echo in rhythm with whispered prayers and the muted rustle of silk. It is in these details that we find the lulling, hypnotic quality of history, the distant, human pattern of lives lived in careful, quiet balance. So, as we drift further into the evening, we carry with us the image of these delicate young royals, frail, watched, guided, yet resilient. We imagine the calm, careful rhythm of their days, the soft murmur of palace life, and the quiet, strangely comforting certainty that, even centuries later, their small, vulnerable humanity remains vividly present in our minds. And with that, we can begin to gently conclude our journey tonight, allowing the faint echoes of palaces, crowns, and quiet fragility to drift us towards sleep. Hey everyone, tonight we're drifting back to a quieter corner of European history. Perhaps you've had a long day, or maybe your mind refuses to stop spinning. Either way, this is a gentle place to rest it. Dim the lights, curl up comfortably, and let the faint hum of history lull you. No swords, no sudden alarms, just the slow, steady rhythm of past lives, mostly forgotten but oddly intimate. We're going to wander through the lives of royals. Not the triumphant heroes of textbooks or glossy documentaries. No, these are the ones who were fragile, eccentric, occasionally pitiful, and sometimes quietly absurd. They had everything: palaces, titles, tutors, attendants, but also immense, sometimes crushing expectations. And often, just enough personal flaws to make them strangely relatable. Let's start with royal marriages, because, naturally, these were rarely about love. They were about alliances, land, and keeping dynasties pure. By pure, they meant cousins, nieces, uncles, sometimes more distant, sometimes uncomfortably close. And, as often happens when people ignore biology, things sometimes went quietly, predictably wrong. Take Charles VI of France. He was nicknamed the Well-Beloved, which is amusing if you ignore the fact that he spent much of his adult life convinced he was made of glass. Entirely glass. He married Isabeau of Bavaria, a polite, charming woman who was fully aware of her duty to produce heirs. And she did, while Charles occasionally tried to stab invisible enemies in the middle of the night. The kingdom, naturally, suffered from paranoia, political tension, and fainting spells. Meanwhile, the Habsburgs perfected intermarriage over generations. Charles II of Spain, the last Habsburg king of his line, inherited what we now call the Habsburg jaw, along with fragile health and limited mobility. He could barely chew his own food without assistance. He was, quite literally, a king in a fragile frame. Genetics quietly undermined power in ways no crown could fix. Over in England, young Edward VI's life illustrates another quiet tragedy. A sickly child, he was surrounded by tutors, wet nurses, and physicians. From infancy, he was expected to learn languages, governance, and history, while fragile enough that a minor illness could threaten his survival. Childhood was preparation, observation, and survival, rather than play. Even when not physically ill, royal children were weighed down by expectation. Queen Victoria's offspring, for instance, were raised on schedules so precise that spontaneity was nearly impossible. Lessons, prayers, etiquette drills, they left little room for rest or distraction. By adulthood, these children were competent, yes, but so regimented that even minor surprises could be disorienting. Louis XIV, the Sun King, was indulged yet monitored, his childhood a careful balance of instruction and ceremony. Tiny seeds of obsession with etiquette, spectacle, and control were planted during these long, structured days. And, over centuries, patterns emerge: fragile health, strict supervision, and delicate psychology often defined royal childhoods as much as crowns or wealth. And yet, for every burden, there were small joys: a secret garden stroll, a whispered story from a nurse, a fleeting game permitted under strict watch. These brief, tender moments remind us that even lives cloaked in velvet and gold contained quiet, human vulnerability. Let's drift over to another royal curiosity: Cosimo I de' Medici, shrewd ruler and father to children alternately brilliant and frail. Hallways echoed with footsteps, corridors lined with soft murmurs and careful monitoring. Peter the Great, as a boy, practiced military drills in palace courtyards while enduring hours of tutoring, preparing for a future that demanded both brilliance and discipline. Even amidst privilege, fragility and expectation quietly shaped their days. And, naturally, the Habsburgs continued their subtle experiments in heredity. Philip II of Spain, intelligent and devout, married carefully but produced children often weak or sickly. Dynastic planning was precise, meticulous, and ultimately powerless against the slow arithmetic of biology. So, as our minds drift over faintly echoing corridors, swaddled princes, and whispered stories, it becomes clear that royal life, despite wealth, title, and apparent power, was delicate, structured, and quietly human. Candlelight flickers across stone floors. Tiny footsteps echo softly. Soft, regulated breathing fills the hall. There is a rhythm here, slow, hypnotic, and oddly comforting. Even centuries later, the fragility, quirks, and minor tragedies of these lives remain tangible, a gentle lullaby for minds that are ready to rest. Let's drift over to the next royal oddity. Now, let's float into a quieter corner of European history, the world of royal marriages. These unions were rarely about love. Naturally, they were about alliances, land, and keeping dynasties pure. By pure, of course, they often meant cousins, nieces, or uncles. Generations of intermarriage quietly set the stage for fragile health, strange features, and delicate constitutions, proof that even crowns cannot override the arithmetic of biology. The Habsburgs, for example, became masters of carefully planned familial unions. Charles II of Spain, the last Habsburg king of his line, inherited what historians call the Habsburg jaw, along with fragile health, stunted growth, and limited mobility. He could barely chew without assistance and struggled with everyday tasks. Genetics, it seems, was quietly mocking the ambitions of centuries of dynastic planning. Portraits show him dignified, if awkwardly so, a reminder that even absolute power cannot protect one from the simple consequences of inheritance. Queen Victoria of England, ever diligent, married her cousins and produced a network of heirs that quietly spread hemophilia across European royal families. Her children married into Russian, German, and Spanish houses, carrying the gene that produced fragile princes and princesses. Tsarevich Alexei of Russia, for example, was born with the disease, making even minor injuries potentially fatal. One imagines Alexandra, his mother, pacing palace halls at night, whispering prayers while silently acknowledging that biology was not to be argued with. Meanwhile, the Bourbons in Spain were similarly meticulous in preserving lineage. First cousin marriages were common, producing children with fragile health, dental deformities, and delayed development. Tutors and physicians hovered constantly, trying to manage delicate balances that, frankly, they had no hope of controlling entirely. One can picture small royal dining rooms filled with whispered instructions, cautious attendants, and the faint smell of overcooked porridge. And yet, amidst these quietly tragic outcomes, there is subtle absurdity. Ferdinand of Austria had the infamous jawline but ruled competently. Charles II's extreme frailty did not prevent him from holding court, issuing decrees, and existing as a symbol of his dynasty. Genetics is cruel, yes, but oddly accommodating in the long rhythm of history. Even marriages that initially seemed safe could yield unexpected results over generations. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, distant cousins, had children who were delicate and often ill. Louis Charles, the young Dauphin, struggled with chronic health issues, leaving his parents in constant, quiet anxiety. It is remarkable, in a strangely comforting way, that even palaces filled with wealth, power, and medical attention could not shield a child from vulnerability. The Medici of Italy, despite immense intellect and wealth, experienced similar patterns. Cosimo I's children alternated between brilliance, frailty, and occasional misfortune. Some survived to adulthood. Others did not. One can almost hear the quiet echo of footsteps along corridors, the soft murmur of nurses, and the measured, deliberate steps of attendants ensuring every child received the utmost care. In France, the Bourbons faced subtler consequences. Minor physical quirks, predispositions to illness, and fragile constitutions quietly shaped their courtly lives. Children grew into rulers, yes, but the private vulnerability beneath the crown persisted. Courtiers whispered of fainting, delicate hands, awkward movements, and faint illnesses, all while the machinery of state continued, slowly and deliberately, around them. Yet, it is not all tragedy. There is a gentle rhythm in these stories. The royals were human, flawed, fragile, and often ill, yet capable of surviving in ways both remarkable and quietly reassuring. Despite centuries of dynastic planning, inheritance, and expectation, vulnerability remained, visible in tiny details: a whispered lullaby, a carefully arranged pillow, a cautious meal. Across Europe, patterns emerge: royal marriages prioritized strategy over health. Genetics quietly influenced outcomes. And yet, amid frailty and illness, resilience endured. These stories, softly observed, form a rhythm of human vulnerability, gently hypnotic, oddly comforting, and perfect for letting the mind drift. And so, as we imagine pale children in velvet gowns, tutors counting syllables, physicians whispering softly in candlelit corridors, we can see the curious, almost hypnotic pattern: royal life, with all its strategy and planning, is quietly human at its core. Titles, crowns, and privileges do not override inheritance, disease, or subtle eccentricities. They magnify them. Let's drift over to the next royal oddity: the petty, eccentric, and sometimes absurd behaviors of kings and queens. Because of course, absolute power does not erase human quirks. It merely amplifies them. And the results are, from a safe distance, perfectly calming to reflect on. Now, let's settle into a quiet corner of history where absolute power meets entirely ordinary human flaws. These are the monarchs whose personal quirks, obsessions, and pettiness often shaped entire kingdoms, or at least made life in their courts endlessly peculiar. They wore crowns, yes, but they were often distracted by shoes, hairstyles, or minor protocol infractions. And that, in itself, is strangely comforting. Even power cannot eliminate human foibles. Take Louis XIV of France, the Sun King. Magnificent, ambitious, and ever meticulous, he ruled with absolute authority. Yet, behind the gilded doors of Versailles, he had small, quietly absurd obsessions. Shoes, for instance. He owned hundreds of pairs, and their color could dictate the subtle moods of the entire court. Imagine him pacing slowly, choosing scarlet over gold, while courtiers whispered and adjusted their bows accordingly. Even kings, it seems, are sometimes preoccupied with surprisingly mundane things. Across the Channel, Charles II of England, the merry monarch, offers a gentler, chaotic example. He had countless affairs, illegitimate children, and a general disregard for marital propriety. Yet he was charming, clever, and mostly indifferent to gossip, unless it interfered with his comfort. Picture him reclining in a velvet chair, sipping wine, while attendants whispered about his latest romantic entanglement. Power, for Charles, coexisted with lazy indulgence and minor chaos. Queen Christina of Sweden is another quietly fascinating figure. She rejected marriage entirely, preferring art, philosophy, and intellectual debate. Her refusal to wed frustrated advisors, but she delighted in salons, discussions, and minor disruptions of court routines. Petty? Perhaps. Deliberate and human? Absolutely. Peter the Great of Russia took eccentricity in a slightly different direction. As a child, he practiced military drills and endured hours of rigorous tutoring. As an adult, he delighted in humiliating nobles with bizarre inspections and invented punishments. One can imagine him quietly fuming over an ill-fitting coat while plotting reforms to drag Russia into a modern age. Petty, yes. Methodical, too. And oddly comforting in the distant reflection of history. George IV of England, in contrast, focused obsessively on fashion, food, and comfort. Lavish clothing, elaborate banquets, and daily indulgences defined much of his reign. He could be vain, socially awkward, and stubborn about minor pleasures, yet his courtly life continued around him, oddly structured despite his whims. Imagine him lingering over desserts, adjusting a powdered wig, while ministers waited patiently to discuss more serious matters. Marie Antoinette, meanwhile, is famous for her tiny, theatrical obsessions, miniature villages, elaborately decorated pastries, and private gardens. While France teetered on the edge of revolution, she quietly staged elaborate little performances in Versailles, arranging life as if it were a gentle, miniature theater. Absurd? Perhaps. Comforting? Definitely, in its calm, repetitive rhythm. Even lesser-known monarchs offer quietly amusing examples. Edward VI of England measured every detail of his life with extreme care. Louis XV obsessed over minor protocol violations at Versailles. Ferdinand II of the Holy Roman Empire insisted on exact ceremonial precision, all while quietly maintaining dignity. Small, human quirks became magnified under crowns, yet they reveal patterns of predictability, repetition, and subtle absurdity. Family life, of course, was fertile ground for minor drama. Children were pawns, mirrors, or participants in courtly disputes. Queens debated precedents, princes sought attention, and minor disagreements occasionally escalated into formal edicts. From a calm distance, these dramas are oddly comforting, human quirks amplified, but contained within the gentle rhythm of palace life. As we drift over these lives, a pattern emerges: absolute power does not erase human frailty. It amplifies it. Obsessions, pettiness, and eccentricities are visible in small details, tiny routines, careful clothing choices, private rituals, all quietly shaping courtly life. And in their imperfections, these monarchs are oddly relatable, perfect companions for a slow, reflective evening. And so, with our thoughts lingering on Louis XIV, Charles II, Queen Christina, Peter the Great, George IV, and Marie Antoinette, we can prepare to drift toward Part 4, sickly, spoiled, and sad, medieval royal childhoods, where fragility, expectation, and privilege collide in delicate, quietly fascinating ways. Now, let's wander quietly back to the medieval world, where castle walls are cold stone, hallways echo faintly, and royal children live lives both privileged and quietly tragic. These little princes and princesses had almost everything: tutors, palaces, attendants, but almost none of the freedom or simplicity that ordinary childhoods enjoy. Play was scheduled, meals were formal, and affection, when offered, was carefully measured. Take Henry VI of England. He was king as a baby, which, naturally, meant very little to him personally. But it did mean endless supervision. Tutors, wet nurses, physicians, every sneeze, every nap, every minor hiccup in digestion was carefully monitored. He was frail, prone to fainting, and had to navigate a world where even a small illness could ripple through the court. One can imagine little Henry, swaddled in layers of silk and wool, staring out the window at the gardens, longing for freedom he could barely imagine. Across the Channel, French royal children experienced similar constraints. Louis IX, later St. Louis, was delicate and frequently ill. His days were filled with lessons in piety, politics, and combat, often while lying in a bed designed more for ceremony than comfort. Even amidst illness, he was expected to grow into a model of royal virtue. Play existed, yes, but always as a carefully supervised and morally instructive activity. Education itself was rigorous and unrelenting. Young royals were expected to master Latin, arithmetic, history, music, and theology, all before reaching adolescence. Tutors measured progress with precision, leaving little room for idle curiosity or spontaneous play. Leisure was regimented, if allowed at all. Jousting lessons, hunting practice, and music training all followed strict schedules. One could almost hear an invisible clock ticking with every carefully monitored moment. Diet was another source of quiet tension. Meals in royal households were designed to impress, not necessarily to nourish. Delicate children might be served rich, spiced dishes far beyond their needs, creating both delight and, often, discomfort. Physicians hovered constantly, adjusting pillows, monitoring digestion, and offering advice that ranged from sensible to slightly absurd. It's comforting, in a strange way, to know that even kings and queens contended with minor gastrointestinal drama. The Habsburg children were prime examples of these pressures. Cosimo I de' Medici's offspring were alternately brilliant and frail, surviving infancy in a delicate balance of care, luck, and strict supervision. One can imagine the quiet corridors of palaces, footsteps echoing softly as nurses and attendants navigated a web of expectations, whispers, and delicate routines. Scotland offers another illustration. James I's early years were marked by captivity, strict tutelage, and constant oversight. Yet even under these conditions, he developed a love for poetry and learning. Quiet intellectual pleasures, permitted in corners of the castle, provided small but meaningful respite from the constant pressure to perform. And, of course, illness was ever present. In a world without modern medicine, fevers, rashes, and minor injuries were serious concerns. Wet nurses, physicians, and attendants formed a continuous background hum of gentle vigilance. One imagines the rustle of linens, the whisper of prayers, and the soft clatter of cups and spoons, all underscoring the fragile, precarious nature of these children's lives. Despite fragility and strictness, these young royals often displayed remarkable resilience. They memorized languages, histories, religious texts, and courtly protocols while still learning to walk or sit at a table. The contrast is quietly fascinating: small bodies, delicate health, yet the expectation to perform with extraordinary competence. Childhood was preparation, performance, and survival, all rolled into one, and rarely a moment of genuine play or ease. As our thoughts drift over these faintly echoing halls, the fragile footsteps of young princes and princesses, the careful arrangement of pillows and books, it's easy to see the rhythm of medieval royal childhoods. Lives of immense privilege, yes, but also of meticulous control, constant observation, and quiet anxiety. Small joys were permitted, occasional music, a short garden walk, whispered stories, but always within strict parameters deemed suitable for royalty. Yet, there is a strange, gentle comfort in these reflections. These children, destined for thrones, were entirely human in their fragility, fears, and small pleasures. Candlelight flickers on polished stone, soft shadows stretch along tapestries, and tiny footsteps echo in rhythm with whispered prayers and muted rustle of silk. It is in these details that we find the lulling, hypnotic quality of history, the distant, human pattern of lives lived in careful, quiet balance. So, as we drift further into the evening, we carry with us the image of these delicate young royals, frail, watched, guided, yet resilient. We imagine the calm, careful rhythm of their days, the soft murmur of palace life, and the quiet, strangely comforting certainty that, even centuries later, their small, vulnerable humanity remains vividly present in our minds. And so, as the candlelight flickers quietly in our imagination, we arrive at the end of tonight's slow journey through royal lives. We've wandered through gilded halls, whispered through corridors of fragile childhoods, and observed monarchs both eccentric and pitiable. Crowns gleamed, robes swished, but beneath all that grandeur, the rhythms of human life, sleep, worry, play, illness, and quiet triumph, remained constant. We've seen royal marriages, carefully arranged and often doomed by genetics, quietly shaping the fates of entire dynasties. We've lingered with kings and queens, preoccupied with shoes, wigs, banquets, or miniature theatrical gardens, revealing the gentle absurdity of absolute power. And we've watched children born into immense privilege, whose lives were governed by tutors, physicians, and unyielding schedules, yet who found small pockets of joy, curiosity, and resilience amidst strict expectations. There is a strange, soothing symmetry in all of this. Despite palaces, crowns, armies, and riches, royals were human. Fragile, flawed, vulnerable. And that, oddly enough, makes their stories comforting. Because we see ourselves reflected in them, not in their power, but in their quiet anxieties, minor humiliations, and fleeting joys. As we imagine the halls fading into darkness, the soft echo of tiny footsteps and whispered prayers, it becomes easy to drift. Candlelight softens, echoes quiet, and the distant rustle of silk settles into silence. These lives, once vibrant and full of ceremony, now exist in gentle memory, guiding us toward rest with their delicate rhythm. So, let your thoughts drift along with theirs. Think of frail children swaddled in velvet, monarchs adjusting their tiny, precise routines, queens arranging miniature gardens, and kings pacing slowly in patterned shoes. Let the quiet absurdity and subtle human frailty lull your mind. There is calm here, in history's shadows. There is rhythm, soft and steady, and a gentle reminder that even the most extraordinary lives contain small, universal truths. And now, as the black screen holds your gaze, and the soft hush of history fades behind your eyelids, allow yourself to settle completely. Breathe slowly. Relax your shoulders. Let the faint echo of these centuries-old footsteps fade into your own calm. Sleep is waiting, and you have wandered with the fragile, the eccentric, and the human, safely, gently, into its quiet embrace. Good night.